Hello?
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 4D and Wakanda user group, 4DMethod. We're getting a little bit of a late start due to some technical difficulties, but nevertheless, we're here. It's September 26th, 2018. Glad you all could join. On our agenda today, we're going to review a little bit about what 4DMethod is all about. We'll get some 4D news from Jim Sobczak and Donna. We might have a Wakanda update. We weren't too sure if Ricardo was going to make it, but I see that he's here, so I'll give you a chance to tell us what's going on in the world of Wakanda. We will have the 4D iNug Digest from Ed Hammond. We'll take a look at what's been going on the 4D blog, and we'll then have our special topic presenter, Kirk Brooks, will be showing us subforms as dynamic data objects, rethinking the 4D form. A lot going on there, a lot changing very quickly. We'll have our general questions and answers and talk about the next meeting on November 7th, 2018. So thanks again for everybody for joining us and putting up with all of our technical fun. My name is Brent Raymond. I organize the 4DMethod, 4D and Wakanda user group. You can see our website at 4dmethod.com, and you can contact us at 4dmethod@gmail.com. Our aim is to bring together a scattered community of developers and users of 4D and Wakanda. We sometimes flailingly stream all of our meetings online via YouTube Live, and you'll get to witness all the bumps and bruises that come along with that. But you know, we want everyone around the world to be able to participate. We record all the meetings in their raw form to be viewed again or shared with others, including our feature presentations. And our goal is to provide fresh new content and exposure and development ideas and application demos and all kinds of interesting stuff for users and developers everywhere. So that's my bit. I'm going to hand it over to Jim and Donna to tell us a little bit about what's been going on with 4D.
Okay, thanks Ed, thanks Brent. As always, we appreciate you organizing these meetings, and it was a scramble today. You did a great job. We really appreciate you inviting the 4D and Wakanda teams to participate. On a separate note, we're glad to see the Chicago Cubs look like they'll be heading back to the baseball playoffs next week. So must be an exciting time in Chicago there. We're looking forward to Kirk's presentation today on forms and dynamic data objects in V17. As most of you know, Kirk is here in the Bay Area, so it's great to see local developers participating in 4DMethod. So thanks for that, Kirk. Regarding V17, an interesting note that in August and September, we had more sales of V17 than any other version of 4D, which is truly an amazing stat considering that we're still at V17.0. I'm sure all of you developers remember when no one would touch a version before it was .3, especially in production. So it just goes to show that our release cycle is working as planned and even better than planned, actually. So thanks to all of you who are testing the R releases and putting them in production. We really appreciate your support there. And with new versions comes requests for training on those new versions. We're getting a lot of requests for that currently. This week, we're doing an on-site V17 training at our largest government installation of 4D in the state of California. They will be moving to V17 before the end of the year. Thanks for putting that slide up. Donna actually is going to mention another training that we're doing in San Jose next week. So I'll leave that to her to talk about that. But you can leave that slide there. Thank you, Brent. And finally, we're fielding many questions about the new website, and I can confirm that we're very, very close to launching. So I hope you've all had a chance to see the preview that's mentioned on our website and in the 4D blog at blog.4d.com, and you're as excited as we are about the new content and the new market that we're the new market, but the different focus of the website in trying to attract new developers and new business to our current developers. So we're looking forward to that very soon. So that's it for me. Donna, I think Donna wanted to mention some training.
Yes, hi. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Brent, again, for putting this together. Really appreciate all your work. I know it's sometimes time-consuming, so we really do appreciate it. And thanks, everyone, for attending the meeting. Thank you, Ricardo, for coming on last minute. I'm glad that you could be here. So basically, yes, we are doing our 4D Essentials training. It's scheduled for next week. It'll be in San Jose, near our office at the Hyatt Place. We have approximately 2 seats left, so anybody who is either local or even can make the time to come out for the training, it'd be great to have you. We have all of our information posted on the website, but you can always contact either myself or Jim or any of the sales team if you need any other questions or have people that are interested in attending. We can be, more than happy to help you with any of your arrangements, or any type of information we can give you. We really appreciate that. I was on our meeting for our weekly meetings that we had this morning for marketing, and I think I can say this, but I know that we are working, and there will be a communication sent out, I believe October 9th, that will basically be announcing. I know we're working on version 17 release 2, so a communication will go out to let everyone know about that, since we did Jim just mentioned the work that we're doing on that. So those are coming along. That's all I have right now.
Great, thanks. Yeah, thanks, you guys, and appreciate the appreciation. Yeah, so not sure if Ricardo, would you like to pop in and tell us what's going on with Wakanda, or otherwise we're
sure. I can give you a quick update. Sorry for the noise. I'm in a coffee right now. Anyway, but thank you, Brent and Ed, and the 4DMethod. This is always phenomenal. I'm sorry that I had to pop up just last minute and take a little bit off the slides sequence. But my update about Wakanda will be brief, is about the product. We are at the 2.6 version. We had about 3 releases this year, and we're expecting a next release by the end of the year. We will address mainly bugs reported by the community, and the team is also looking for a good React template to attend the growth of React in the market right now. So we should have a new template for people that want to start a React project. And on the second note, it's mainly, I'll submit to Brent after, but we have a phenomenal project right now being delivered to the School District of Texas. And it has it's a whole complex system with 4 apps for the parents, for the kids, for the staff, and for the buzz riding. The buzz riding is creating a lot of buzz, because it looks like we are hitting, the company is hitting the market quite well, which will allow parents to receive notifications from the school bus system saying that, oh, your kid was picked up in this stop, it was dropped off in this stop, and they received messages, and they can follow the bus. And it's a pretty interesting project, very large, and we are just in the pilot right now. The implementation started in the school year. It may be a good topic for maybe a future, I'm doing a pitch here for a future, maybe a presentation for the 4DMethod. And that's pretty much all I have.
Great, thanks, Ricardo. That sounds very interesting, especially with from my perspective, just putting my my kids on the bus this year. So it would be great to be able to monitor her from the web. I'm sure she'd appreciate that, but she doesn't have to know. So, but yes, it's great to hear that Wakanda's getting some interesting projects out there, and we'll be looking forward to seeing a demo of those applications. So moving on, we have Ed Hammond here to give us a brief summary of what discussion's been happening on the iNUG. Thanks, Ed.
Thank you, Brent. I will say on a personal note, it's a lot scarier when you send the kids off in a car. Fortunately, a lot of cars can report back where they are and how fast they're going and all kinds of other things. Anyway, welcome to the 4D iNug e-Digest. We cover a wide breadth of topics, 4D tech issues, and if you are at all interested in 4D, you should be subscribed to the 4D tech list. You can take advantage of the wealth of 4D experience and knowledge that's out there. Generally, if you've got a question, somebody else has the same question and may already be discussing it, or you can just ask it and hopefully get a response and an answer. You have links there for how to get subscribed to the iNug. And without further ado, I will go into some of the more interesting topics that I've found since our last meeting. Tim Nevels had a thread on first day experience using 4D V17 Hotfix 1. He reported very positive experience using V17 over a WAN connection and expressed the joys of object notation. If you haven't gone to 17 yet, you should check out that thread. Dan Ivey was looking for sales tax solutions for 4D, looking for ways to handle sales tax calculations across multiple jurisdictions. And that thread mentions taxjar.com and Avalara, and is got recommendations from a number of developers. Tim Nevels wanted to know about sending text messages from 4D. How do you do this? Apparently, Bertrand Soberon has a product, and there's a link in that thread to his product. Other services mentioned were Twilio.com, Clevo.com, Data24-7.com, and many services, especially for cell messaging. You can send an email message direct to a recipient using their services. AT&T and Verizon have those things built in. Ed Glasgow was wondering about a simple example for SVG, and that thread has a great start for someone wanting to learn more about SVG, and includes a tip from Tai Bui about the command SVG tool show in viewer, and includes code. Pat Bensky was wondering about new record numbering systems and call worker. Her question was about updating sequence number code using worker processes. Simple response was use storage. This is an extended thread which explores execute on server, storage, missing numbers, transactions, suspending transactions, recovering unused numbers, etc. And it is a long thread. There's over 40 messages in that thread. Dave Nasrallah wanted to know about isolating the cause of a server crash, and don't we all? Basically, how to sleuth around and find the cause. A number of good suggestions on that. Peter Jacobson had a question about the latest thinking for PDF generation on Windows. If this is something you have to deal with, check out how to handle PDF generation on Windows, and what your options are. And finally, for this session, David Adams, who is done shaking his fist at the cloud, but did want to know, do I want to use selection to array instead of go to selected record server side in V17? Generally, that subject is not exactly the way the thread took a turn. What David Adams is doing is generating large text from a selection, and that sort of evolved into how to best allocate memory and get performance for doing that operation. Interesting thread from David Adams. And that will wrap up the digest for the month. Thank you, Brent.
Thank you, Ed. A lot of good conversations out there. Again, like Ed said, a lot of us end up, we're working on vastly different applications, but some of the problems end up being the same kind of thing. So a lot of opportunity there for you to find a solution to your own development problems without going through all the headaches. I'll say one thumbs up, a +1 for storage. That has been enormously useful, and I've immediately started using that across all my applications. So next, let's see what we have going on. Yes, what the blog. So in this segment, I like to highlight a few of the blog posts that have been put up at 4D.com, blog.4D.com. They are just really putting out a lot of great material there. It's not only write-ups and illustrations of these concepts, but sample demo databases. There's been a series of posts involving the new 4D for iOS from David Azanco. Not sure what the French pronunciation of. My French sounds a lot like English, so I won't go total redneck as Azanco, but you know, I'm sure I'll be corrected in due course. But really great content from him, hoping perhaps to get him in the 4D method to show us some of the new capabilities of 4D for iOS. Lately, he's put out find which Apple developer program you need, a banking app tutorial with 4D for iOS, how to beta test iOS apps using test flight. Of course, that's very handy, test flight. I think that's largely a standard for the app development community, so it's great for us to get in and start using it ourselves. And how to manage mobile sessions in 4D for iOS. Again, this is an all new component, all new feature for. I'm not even sure if it's a separate component, but it's an all new development push for 4D, and it's really looking interesting and appears to be very flexible for creating these iOS apps relatively pain-free directly from your applications, and have them be able to access the rich data that you have in your applications. So check it out. A lot of good information there, especially at the other link, the 4d.github.io, where a lot of the how-tos and tutorials, general tutorials for 4D for iOS are being put online. So check it out. Also, I'd wanted to put a little light, shine a light on the new series of blog posts that Thomas Mao has been putting out. I think he stated, he called them about driving with the handbrake on. You know, I immediately thought dragging an anchor, but essentially it's a review. They are a review, a multi-part review of the compatibility settings that have, for some of us who have been using for 4D for many versions and over many years, as you upgrade the applications, these compatibility settings creep into the database settings. And sometimes it can be easy to overlook them and forget to, say, turn them on or know what how to code differently in reaction to them in the case of query by formula. And his latest blog post is use period and comma as placeholders, that setting. I mean, these are some of my favorite posts because, you know, it's kind of like going to the summit and getting the tips and tricks that you might not otherwise know about or have forgotten over time. This series is really shining a light on some small little tweaks that can have a gigantic impact in your application. So check it out and keep an eye out for the next posts in that series. Bound to be interesting. So on to our special topic, best part of the meeting. Today we have subforms as dynamic data objects, rethinking the 4D form from Kirk Brooks. He's connecting to us from the Bay Area in San Francisco, California. He first started 4D development in 1988 in Albuquerque, New Mexico, by way of an inventory system for a fine art gallery. I wonder what that's like. Wink, wink.
What? What?
Yeah. Since then, he's moved on to many other projects, including currently he's an IT manager at the Energy House since 2003. He's best known for his enterprise information system, Subcontractor Manager, or in short, Sub-Manager, not to be confused with a Navy Sub-Manager. That is something else. This Sub-Manager is used to write and submit bids and proposals for customers, manage project scheduling, warehouse management, purchasing, billing, sales commissions, and other core business functions, and perhaps even walking the dog. I don't know. We're going to find out. We in the community know Kirk best for his exhaustive contributions to discussions on the iNUG and his great sessions at the 4D summits. When I first started the 4DMethod user group back in 2012, I made a Google Doc, which I actually looked up recently this week, with a short list of names of people I thought would be great to have in the group for a presentation. And Kirk was, of course, one of the first names on that list. So I'm happy to say we finally have him here with us today, and I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Well, Brent, I have to say that is one of the best introductions I think I've ever gotten. I'm going to have to remember that and see if I can contract with you for other occasions.
Great, great.
And thanks for having me.
I'll accept the check in the mail when you get a chance. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll Gmail it too. So let's see. I need to share a screen. Let me do that. Get it started. Oh, come on. I guess I'm going to have to share it and then begin my presentation. Do this too. Okay, so I'm going to share this one.
There we go.
We'll begin. Okay, is everyone looking at the word new?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. When Brent and I talked about, doing this presentation, during the summit last spring, I had just finished a presentation there based in V15 because I really hadn't started working in V17 very much yet, on using subforms as data objects and how you could, you could just do these really wonderful things with writing data to the subform from the parent form, excuse me, and then you could, work in the subform and then pass it back to the parent form. And in V15, this was pretty cool because it wasn't really something that you could do very easily. And then of course I watched Thomas Mall and Laurent and so come out and really show how V17 basically just does all that stuff for you now. And I was very excited about that because, in fact, frequently when I've done, when you do a presentation at a summit, you don't, as you prepare for it, you're not always sure that Laurent isn't going to come out with some new thing that just kind of obviates whatever you spent all this time working on. And I was pleased to see that I had actually kind of anticipated the correct direction. It's just they took it so much further. And the more I started working with V17, the more I realized, how easy it was to accomplish in V17 what I'd spent, a fair amount of time trying to make easy to do in V15. And, and as we were talking then, as Brent and I were talking then, I said, gosh, what I think would be fun to do would be to do a presentation that's essentially the presentation I did here, but upgraded for V17. And as I began working on that, I came to realize that that was just not the correct way to go. The correct way to go was simply to embrace using Orda and the new V17 capabilities. So, as I began looking at that as a long time and primarily a 4D developer, I mean, that is the sharpest tool in my skill set. I started realizing that as much as anything, I was fighting against my paradigm of how 4D should be from all my years of doing it versus what is available through Orda. And as I came to realize that, I realized that's what I really wanted to focus on here. Now I'm still going to touch on the things that I said I would. But what I really want to try to do here is impart some of my enthusiasm for this direction that 4D is going and inspire you to take the time to learn and experiment with these capabilities. Because frankly, it's a paradigm shift in thinking about how you make a 4D database. And, and this is part of my immense respect for what Laurent has accomplished with Orda. It's really a different way of thinking about the data and working with it in a database. And that can be a challenge for those of us steeped in 4D culture. And it kind of leads to these questions. First, do you even need it? And that's not just a rhetorical question if you've got, a 30-year-old 4D database that is making a living for you. And to be honest, the answer is no, you really don't. If you have a data set that is essentially code from encoding structure, converting that stuff to Orda is not going to be a happy experience necessarily. And besides, you're busy, so why spend the time to learn this whole new language to do that? And these are perfectly good arguments. But I also think there's some valuable reasons why you should learn it, which is the second question. How do you learn it? And personally, I think you just have to be willing to adopt what they call the beginner's mind. You have to be willing to be in that state for a little while of just not understanding, not being an expert, not just knowing how to get it done right now, but instead wondering what's the way to do it, how do I make the tools work together. So in that pursuit, I encourage you to just decide to learn language, not so much as an addition to what you already know, because Orda is just a different way of thinking about it. And personally, I found the more I try to enforce my existing ways of thinking about 4D or use Orda within those existing ways of thinking about it, the less it was really working. I would just find myself starting with something that seemed relatively simple, deciding, okay, how do you do this with Orda? And then I'd start into it. And pretty soon it was just insanely complicated. And typically that was because I was starting it in Orta, but then I was starting to do it a classic 4D way and switching back and forth, and it just and it becomes muddied. So I caution you against that, and we'll talk about a way to the ways that I go about avoiding that trap later. And then of course there's the question about, all right, so given all that, what can I do with it? And that's going to be the body of what we're going to talk about here. I'm going to echo what Brent was saying about the blog, for example. I am very impressed with, again, another change that 4D has made about embracing the blog on one hand, and on the other hand, putting really good information on there. Simply go do that. The other thing to do is to watch or rewatch the presentations from the summit. Thomas Mall's overview and Laurent's master session are just, are things that, when you're there in the room and you hear it, it's so impressive and it's just exciting. But I tell you, about 4 months after that, I came back and I rewatched it again, and suddenly I was just getting a whole nother level of information out of that. That's going to happen the more you work with Orta, again, because it's a different way of thinking about it. And as your thinking changes, then when you go back and watch that presentation again, you're going to have it. You're suddenly going to be going, oh, that's what he means. So let's take a look at the first thing on my GitHub site, and if they don't already, I'm sure 4DMethod will have this link also. I've made a database that I call Sideorder, and this is a project that I began for my own learning, and I really recommend that you consider either downloading mine and working through it, or even better is just make your own. And at this point, I'm going to pause this, and let's just go look at this.
Yeah, I did add that to the post on the 4DMethod site. So there's 2 links of content directly from Kirk for this demo.
Thank you, Brent. The version that's on there is a little bit condensed from the one that I'm going to be playing with here. It has all of the stuff we're going to go over right now. What it doesn't have is the presentation material, because to be honest, I was working on that right up until this morning. If there's interest, I can put this this version up also. But here was my idea. I just decided that I would start working through the documentation and begin with collections. Collections are not perhaps formally part of Orta, but as a great leap forward in terms of managing data structures in memory in 4D, they're incredibly important.
Hey, Kirk.
I'm sorry?
Sorry, just before you get too far into it, I was going to try and see if you could bump up the font there a little bit.
Oh, of course. Let's see what's an easy way to do that.
There's a hotkey, but there's definitely go to 4D prefs. Yeah.
See if that's going to do it. How's that? Is that better or bigger?
There we go. Yep. Great.
Okay. Well, in that case, let me go back to Explorer. What I did, for one thing, I happen to like the home view on Explorer, especially if you get to it early. And hey, 4D, this is really cool. It would really be nice if it were easier to use these folders, just saying. Anyway,
That's a good hey 4D.
You know, as far as the learning aspect of it, I decided I wanted to look at collections, and then I was going to learn everything about data classes, the data store, entities, entity selections. All right. So I began making methods, and then I started with just the basic stuff. Part of this is, as I said, was becoming familiar with a collection. And as I did this, I started to realize that a collection is really even more important than arrays are, because in Orda, you can't actually even address an array directly. You can only address a collection. So that's one conceptual thing to recognize. If you're working in Orda, arrays are no longer your friend. Now you need to work with collections. And so I began simply with the most elementary elements of how do you address it? How do you add elements? You know, some of these things turn out to be a little counterintuitive, like push made sense, but unshift was kind of surprising to me as a way to insert something at the beginning of a collection and return the modified collection. And all of this programming is basically information that, these are the examples that are in the documentation. And again, I have to commend 4D for the quality of the documentation that I've encountered so far, having to do with most things having to do with Orda. Frequently, that was, you know, it took a little while for the docs to catch up to the actual release, and I suppose this is another attribute of the R release program.
I think some of the naming they might not be entirely to blame for. I think they're attempting to mirror some JavaScript, basic JavaScript functions and that kind of thing. But you know, in order to make it easier for JavaScript programmers to code directly in 4D. So,
and that's a great point. You know, so part of what this process then accomplishes for you as a 4D programmer is to make you a little more conversant about some of the other contemporary languages. Mm-hmm. So in that respect, it's a two-way street. And I simply went through and played with these. As I got more into it, I began incorporating more of the actual definition so that it would remind me of what's going on. I can't tell you how beneficial that was. I probably spent a couple of days doing that, and it went a long way of getting me up to speed. So I commend that to you as a possibility for something that will help you. So moving on, Thomas Mall has become something of my hero for doing these sorts of presentations. And in fact, if I lapse into a poor German accent, it sometimes happens when I'm talking to myself. But one of the things he said in the presentation during the summit that has just resonated with me was this: that Orda, pardon me, lets you treat an object like a database and the database like an object. Now, data and program logic are preferably two separate things, at least to programmers. But in a lot of 4D databases, these things become pretty muddled. Lots of us began working in 4D without much or any former computer science training. That was me, to be honest. And in fact, it's long been a strength of 4D that you have the ability to get a great many things done without necessarily having a very deep knowledge about what makes them work. But the downside to this is that it leads to a 4D project being a little muddled and conflated between the business logic, the data, and the interface. And I've done that. So with experience in projects like that, saying something like an object is a database and the database is an object, is perhaps a little bit like your financial advisor just looking at you and saying all you need is love. But let's take a look at it. Again, as I said in my, earlier, in V15, working with subforms as data objects, it took some effort to do. In V17, you can accomplish pretty much everything I described in a whole presentation back in April in version 15, simply by using the new form object. And the coding required to use the subforms is so much simpler. An object is a database. All right, so what does this mean? In 4D now, an object looks very much like a JSON, but as Lauren in So's Summit presentation clearly explained, it's not just a JSON. And objects in V17 are optimized way more than anything that I think we're used to before. So it's not just a thing in memory like it was in V7 and V15, for example. You create an object, you've got it in memory. If you make a copy of that, you've got another copy of the same thing. Objects in 4D now are using references. This is highly efficient, it's highly fast, but it's also extensible. So when I make an object, I'm making a data structure, even if it's a simple one with just a single key and value, but it can also be a complex one. In fact, the whole idea of the data store is nothing more than the database as a great big object. As I said, collections are the beginning of that. You can perform, one of the things I came to realize is that you can actually do lookups, insertions, and deletions on collections. And in fact, you can use a collection just like a whole database. And I have a little demonstration of that. Okay, so here I've got a simple little dialogue, and this is the form method for this dialogue. So we have, so what we're going to do, I downloaded a JSON of all the Nobel laureates and the things they won. And I have that as a file in the resources folder. So what we're going to do is we're going to open this form. We're going to get that file. We're going to read it into some text, and then we're going to put that text into the form variable called data. So let's look at that. And if we look at form, you see I put it in something called form.data. Here is form.data. Here are the prizes. There's 585 elements on there. And there's a category, chemistry, for example. This is the year 2017. Then there are the laureates who won, and so forth. Kind of a rich data set. You also notice that read in pretty quickly. And here it is. And by clicking, I can see all of those people. So right here, I'm using an object as a database. Except, instead of having an external database, as I might have done in V15, for example, I might have wanted to ship this data, but I wanted to be able to, to do lookups on it real quickly. And to do that, I might have put it in an external database, using SQL and all that other good stuff that we could do. I could ship it with this little database, and then I could load it when I needed it. First, that was a lot more complicated than what we're doing here. Second, and I haven't actually timed it, but I'd be willing to bet it's probably not going to be as quick. It's certainly not as easy. And you're thinking, all right, well, that's not a very big file. What if we have a really big file? Well, oops. Okay, let's go to the object method. So I've got a button here, and I've got another file, which is a bigger file. And let's try that and see what we get. Let's put a, now I have a trace on there. Excellent. Well, that was pretty good. How big was that? Object has data in, has 2,800 items in it. And this looks like some price list I just grabbed that I happen to have some of our stuff. And you see that one read in pretty quick. Now there is a limit to that. I was playing with this and I downloaded one huge data set. I think it was like 3 gigabytes or something. That one crashed. So, you know, there are physical limits to this, but this is a great solution. This is a way for you to ship, for example, external data files, just as a JSON document sitting in the resource folder or sitting someplace else on a disk. And, you know, as you see, it doesn't take long to read these things in. I mean, you know, boom, there it is. You could almost put that in a pop-up. So there's an example of using an object as a database. And the database is the object. And this is what this is where Orda really becomes impressive, because it allows us to treat the entire database as though it were an object. This is what the Datastore is all about. It's a representation of the tables and the records of the database in the same format, which is this dot notation format that we can treat a simple little variable with. That is a cool feature. Now, I touched on this a little bit before, but the conceptual difference in the way we look at data with Orda and classic 4D is that classic 4D has a record and a current selection. And these are actual records. That is the data. You cannot change a record without making it the current record. If a table is in read-write, you establish a current record, then that record is locked, assuming it wasn't already, and you can make changes to it. No one else can do that while you have it locked. Conceptually, you have the data until you unload the record. Mechanically, it may not be exactly that clear cut, but that's the important principle here. Orda, on the other hand, doesn't do that. When you reference something in the Datastore, the data, 4D makes a reference to what's there at that moment. It's almost like a reflection of the actual data, and you can treat it as though it were the data. You can make changes, you can know if what changes have been made since you established your reference, and then you can save them, and you can decide what to do if somebody else saved them in the meantime. So let's take a look at what I'm talking about here. So what I wanted to do is just make some simple common tasks that we do in 4D. One of the most common is find a record, make some changes, and save it. So typically, I'd put the table into read-write. I'd query for an employee record. I'd take the first record and change it. I'd save it, and boom, we're done. I'm doing the same thing in Orda. Then I'm first going to make an entity selection. I'm going to use the Datastore, which is what this DS is. I'm going to refer to the class, which is the table. And I'm going to do a little query. I'm going to do the same query that I did up here, which is I'm going to look at the first name equals :1. What does that mean? This is the nomenclature that the query command, which you'll find as part of collections, uses, where you define your query arguments in a string and then have the option of referring to variables that are specific to this query. And so in this case, I'm saying I want the first name to equal my first argument, and then my first argument is the one that follows the semicolon, and that's the same argument that, oh, well, actually, I changed it, didn't I? No, I didn't. I did it up here. See, it's the same argument that I used up here, okay? But I'm doing this all in order. And then, because I could get more than one, I only want the first one, which is essentially what I'm doing here. And then I take the entity, this query function returns a selection. Actually, it returns an object that contains a selection. And then I'm taking the entity out of that. And that entity, I'm taking the first name, which 4D defaults to the record, the field name, and then setting it to just some arbitrary new value. And then I'm saving it. So we can run this, see what happens. I have some sample data in here. And in fact, we'll do this. Let's find all these people over here. And by the way, these names and all this information came from the fake names database. So there's nothing real in there. So let's begin running this and see what we get. Okay, if we look at the employee record, we found a selection of 8, and we had an Eileen Johnson, and I've now changed it to Zeline Johnson. All right, let's go ahead and run this through Orda and see what we get. So let's look at this. We have these up here. So the entity selection found 8 entities. It found 8 or 7 entities. It found 7 instead of 8 because we already changed one up there. The individual entity that I found this time ought to be Alan Brown, and in fact it is. Okay. Now we'll keep going. So now we should see, and we do, that the A in Alan has been changed to a Z, and now we're going to save that. And let's see how that worked. And resulto, my result object tells me success true. So the save was successful. And I'm simply going to put them put them all back. And in fact, if we go over here, you notice that these two changed because they're different. And now I'm going to restore them. And I did everyone except this one. So why didn't Johnson's name change when I did this? The reason is because I never unloaded the record up here. Consequently, it was still locked by 4D Classic. And even though we're in the same process as we are down here, 4D Classic and Orda do the same data, but they don't share the same data. So because I have this record locked in 4D Classic mode, Orda is not able to save it because 4D Classic uses the pessimistic lock, which is to say, it's mine, you can't have it. Orda uses the optimistic lock, which is to save the changes that I made into the entity, but then not commit them to the data until I specifically do that with save. And we'll talk about what's going on with that specifically a little bit more later on. Here's another example of using this. So this time we're going to change the order reference first, and then we're going to change something in 4D Classic, and then we're going to see what that does. So let's walk through this. This is fun. All right, so here we are again. This time our entity selection is 7 because we don't have Johnson anymore. The entity that I chose is Brown. So now we got Zlyn Brown. And this time I'm saving the ID, the specific ID of Brown. Okay, well, I don't have it displayed here. I'm using UUIDs for the IDs. And I'm also not saving that entity yet. I want to show you what happens. So now we're going to come down into 4D Classic, and this could be in a separate client if you're in a multi-user environment, for example. Now I want to make sure I find that specific record. All right, so now I'm going to search for this employee by that ID, and I found him. And now I'm going to make a change to the record, but I'm not going to change the name. All right, I changed the name up there, but here I'm simply going to add some arbitrary stuff to the record. I'm going to save it. I'm going to unload it. I'm going to put it back in read write. Now, when I issue the save command, the orda save command, save the entity, I'm including this DK auto merge option. And what this does. First, you notice the change seems to stick. Let's see what Resulto says. Resulto says the success that we saved was success. So that's good. Now, what if I hadn't used auto merge? I mean, what did auto merge actually do for me? Well, let's run this again. Okay, we know what it's going to do. Let's just get down here to the good part. So, and we see that we do not have success. And we get something that tells us the stamp has changed. And the stamp is this concept that every time something is saved, the stamp is simply a counter that gets incremented. Okay, so the stamp, we don't see it, but 4D knows what the stamp is on the entity based on when we created it. It recognizes that some other operation somewhere in the database has changed that record. Not necessarily the fields that we're interested in, but that record. And so if we go to try to save our entity because there's some other change someplace else, that's what it's informing us of. And this gives us a lot more opportunity to respond to those changes than we had before. And this is really quite powerful. Okay, so now we can start walking through here and we can say, okay, I want to go get the current entity. So I want to go get the current copy of that record. And this time I'm going to put a pessimistic lock on it. And this is how you do this in order. You just say lock. The equivalent of what we normally do in 4D, or this is the equivalent of what happens implicitly, for example, when I query for that record, or explicitly if I called load record in read write, and that was the current record. And you know, by the way, if somebody has a question about something, don't hesitate to interrupt me on this. I'm realizing an oddness of this is I'm just sitting here in my office, kind of talking to myself, and
yeah, no,
it's a little euphoric sometimes.
Yeah, no, it's so far so good. It's great content so far.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
So this is really cool. I was really I think this is just really great. Here's what we can tell now using Orda. First, we've got this touched function. And touch simply says true if something that we did in our Orda operation within this context changed something. And we can know what that is. In a collection, of course, because we're not using arrays anymore. And I hope you can see this. I don't know if I can make this larger or not. But the touched attributes is showing us that first name, which is an attribute of the entity, is the thing that we changed. And that is, you know, just to be really clear about it, exactly what we did right here. Okay. And we could have made any number of these, of course. I mean, we could have changed absolutely everything. But with this, I can iterate through the attributes that were changed. I can get the individual attribute. And let me just say, this is a very cool feature of the for each command, because this structure populates this first parameter or with whatever type of data is appropriate for whatever you're iterating over. So what does that mean? Well, in this case, because we're iterating over a collection of scalar values, which is basically just words, and those words are the names of properties or keys, it returns a text variable into here. Now you're going to kind of have to know that when you do your structure, but I'm, you know, in this demo, I'm playing a little fast and loose with it. On the other hand, if we were iterating over, you know, a collection that was itself a collection of objects, then it would be returning an object or a collection. It would return whatever it needed to have returned. That can be a little confusing the first few times you try to use it, because this looks so much like a regular for loop, but it's not. And also, you don't need to know what the index number is. You know, that comes up a lot in some things, and we'll come perhaps circle back to that as well. Anyway, so the attribute is essentially the key. So what I want to do is I'm going to take the current entity, which is the copy of the actual data store record that I got, that I locked, that I know I can change because I know my lock was successful. I'm going to take that, and I can't use dot notation to directly reference a variable, but all I have to do is put it in square brackets. And then I'm going to set the current entity's attribute to my entity's attribute. And I'm going to loop through those, and then I'm going to save. And now Resulto ought to be telling me that it's true, and it does. Now, sure, in production, I would probably, you know, be more fastidious about checking the result here and you know, having some other contingencies because that's real life. But for this demo, we're just going to be happy there. Now we're going to unlock the record from our Orda context. And we can go over here and see if those manifested over here. I think my entity was Johnson. There's Johnson. Johnson is Zeline, and that's what we wanted. And now we'll see if I can restore them all. And yes, I did. So you can see that the order that you make changes in and the context that you make changes in is important. You need to be aware of it, and you have this tool now to be able to deal with it. So to summarize, though, the difference between using auto merge and entity save in this situation was this. When I saved saying auto merge, the save command went ahead and wrote my changes into the record, even if there may have been other changes subsequent. If I want to be careful about that, if I want to make sure that something else didn't maybe change something that I'm about to change, and then I want to evaluate whether I still want to make my change based on somebody else, you can see how that can get pretty complicated. And I may not care, but if I do care, then I call save without auto merge, and then I can evaluate the result. And then I can put in logic to check myself and make sure that I'm doing the thing that I want to do.
Did you get into, I mean, we do a lot of working, and I've had the same experience with arrays. I mean, they're clearly not entirely applicable to the new way of doing things with Orda, but you know, old ways are hard to break. Did you get into any sort of larger manipulations of data where you're pulling down whole collections and then pushing them back up to entity selections?
No, I haven't. I haven't actually put a 17 database into production yet. Mm-hmm. You know, I was working on it I was spending quite a lot of time in V17 this summer, but then, I got busy and right. with stuff that actually pays me. And so I haven't been able to spend as much time doing that as I want to. So I don't have that real world experience and that kind of stuff yet.
Mm-hmm. No, it's a great follow up to this kind of an experimentation, because as we all know, who've done some 4D code, we have the selection to array and then array to selection, and that's a great traditional option for handling large amounts of data updates. And there are equivalents in Orda. However, I would say you're getting much richer information in the response from the save and the record locking in Orda, handling them one by one, I would just say.
To accomplish that same functionality previously, or using 4D Classic, as I call it, would certainly be possible. But, I mean, just consider how much more work that would be. Mm-hmm. It would be, it would really be quite, it'd be involved. And it would be a lot harder to test and error check.
Right. No, it's, that's why I asked.
Yeah. But that actually leads right into my next slide anyway. I think it was any of us. And this is true for 4D Classic and 4D Orda. I'm finding the most successful applications of Orda in an existing database are in situations where you can encapsulate whatever you're doing with Orda either at the very least within a single method, and then perhaps even within modules or areas of processing. And this is not a technical limitation. There's no, you certainly can swap back and forth between the two, but it's just not as smooth. And I find it confusing. And plus, I mean, there's some penalty I think you pay simply taking regular, taking classic selections, for example, and converting them to a collection or an entity selection. Excuse me. It's fast. There's nothing wrong with it, but if you start finding yourself flipping between those two ways of approaching something, there's probably an easier way to do it that doesn't require you doing that. Excuse me, just a sec. So, what I love about working with Orda, I can do more with less. List boxes are the obvious example of this. And in V15, well, I've talked about that already. I mean, in V17, all that stuff basically happens for you. It's easier to manage complex data because to echo Thomas again, you can treat the database as an object. You can treat an object as the database. You can establish a naming convention. You can establish some ways of working with particular types of data and be consistent, whether you're dealing with record data, whether you're dealing with provisional data, whether you're whatever. You have fewer things to keep in mind. That one went a little fast. Another thing that this gives us the opportunity for is a simplified structure. Here's one from a project I'm actually using, where I began thinking, all right, these sorts of relationships are fairly common, where you've got a file of agents. In my case, agents are people or companies. All right, so that's what the entity type on here refers to. I always like to have a name, and they're active or not. And I realized I only actually need two other fields. And to be honest, I could combine the meta and the data field into one, but I have a history now of using this meta field to collect things like the created by, created date, and modified by, modified date information into that object. I have a set of tools for working with them, for displaying it on, and so that's why I segregate it. And then everything else can really be just in one big data file. In 4D Classic, you could do this as well. It was kind of clunky dealing with it. Laurent gave us the query by attribute query command that was pretty good, but I don't know, that one really didn't flow. And of course, what was missing was the object notation that we have now, so that anything that's in that data field can be referenced with object notation just as easily as if it were a first level field. That's a big benefit. That's really a big benefit. A name index is, again, something that I've adopted for a long time, where I like to just parse whatever names are associated with an agent into individual records, put a soundex tag with them, and then identify whether it's a first name, last name, whatever. That again is part of my search functionality. And then the employee relationship gives me a way to an easy way to identify who the employee is, that is, who the person is, because an employee can only be a person. and then who their employer is, which could be a company, it could be another person. And of course, a person could have any number of employers. So this is a handy way of managing that. Now, I have another demo that we're going to look at to just kind of play with this idea of using a data structure. I'm sorry. Using a data structure.
Gesundheit.
Yeah, getting over the flu, I'm afraid. Okay, so what are we going to do here? And this is a little rough, but I left it rough on purpose so that we can actually play with it a little bit. First off, let's just run this form. Okay, and look at what happens here on the onload. So because this is an invoice example, I need some items to sell. Again, I put this just in a JSON file, and I parse that into this items collection. And we've got 60 something items in here. So that's our inventory that we're going to sell. And then I made an object to be the actual invoice. This is created by this little method. And so our structure here is that we're going to have a single object that we call invoice. And the invoice is going to have a customer. The customer is going to have a name, address, and phone number. Boom. There's that. And now, you know, we've got some document information. So I just, you know, make up a trivial little invoice number, give it a date. We're going to have a subtotal, some tax, a total, and we're going to call that our invoice doc. And then that invoice itself is going to have some line items. And I just note this here to remind myself of what they're going to be. And I'm typing along the way. So once that runs, I'm going to put and I'm putting all this into the form object. So I'm not even creating I'm not creating even a process variable or anything. I'm just using form. And here is the object that we created. Right now, everything's empty. And then I'm also creating this LB object used for the UI on the list box. Well, what does that mean? So my list box is, and I'm sorry, are you able to, is this legible?
It's small, but with close zoom, it's certainly legible.
Let me see if I can.
I'm not sure if the property list zooms too well. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm not able to zoom in on that. I did not think of this. Well, so I'll describe what we're doing. This list box is based on a collection. And the collection is the line items, the invoice.line items collection. By doing that, that's why I can, as you see, define each column using this. And for anyone who hasn't played with this yet, I just can't tell you how cool this is. Because I defined the list box as associated with an entity, 4D creates this element named this. This is always the selected or the item represented by this particular row. So, just right now, obviously, there's nothing in it. When I add an item, now there is. So this name is cold climate intake damper. It's pretty exciting, isn't it? This quantity, this total, that's all I had to do to populate this list box. All right, there is no coding at all in this list box with respect to that. Now, the other thing that, and this is where that LB object that I created comes in, is this. When you have a collection-based or list box, you have 4D manages these three elements that it calls data sources. The current item is, obviously what you have currently clicked on. The current position and the list box selection. Now, right now, before we look at it, and I've defined these as being form.lb.current item, form, et cetera, et cetera. So if I come over here, pop us into the debugger, here is that form.lb item that I created at startup, and here is the current item, and it is the actual collection element with all the data. The selection is itself a collection, which obviously only has one element right now because that's the only thing I've done, and the index, the line number is 1. As you know, because collections begin numbering at 0, that line number does not correspond to the collection index. You would have to subtract 1 to get to that. So that's pretty handy. So now let's see what happens when I start filling in these things. And returning to this, you notice that each of these fields are actually simply variables. And the variable expression is the form.invoice.customer.name. So I'm just referring everything back to the form object. And now here's a question. So if you look over here, you see that I didn't define an email field in my initial object, but I'm referencing one here. So what's going to happen when I do that? Well, let's go look. So here's my invoice. Here's my customer. It just adds it on. Now savor that. Savor that for a moment. Think how cool that makes it to be able to design a data structure as you're laying out your form. That's a neat feature.
I'm a little surprised that it didn't give an error upon displaying it, given that it's a null value.
Yeah, and actually, it would be nice. Someone in a higher pay grade than mine could probably speak to how that happens. But my impression is that this is just part of the optimization that has gone into making 4D work like this.
Mm-hmm.
It will throw an error had I not defined customer.
Right.
Okay. But but 4D seems to be comfortable appending properties to an object as long, that's already defined.
Mm-hmm.
So just to make an example here, so if I took object dot customer dot this dot that, and we can actually watch this happen, you get an error. That's however, that one doesn't. And I believe that's the same principle that we're looking at right here.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll admit that's beyond my pay grade. But nonetheless, that is a tremendously useful feature. If you couple that with stashing a bunch of this data in something like in a generic table, where this would be data, this would be an object, that becomes pretty flexible and pretty rapid in an opportunity for either A, rapid development, or B, for you to provide your user a flexible interface for data that may be important to them, but which you don't necessarily need to, be so aware of in terms of managing the structure of your database. Anyway, that's just a fun feature, I think. So returning to this, to finish this up, I'm just going to add a few more items on here real quick, and I'm going to show you how I'm doing the calculations on this. Where did my Explorer go? Okay, so another couple of gotchas about working with databases. The footers don't work natively. So for example, if you see I have this set to custom, even though it is giving me a total, well, I'm actually calculating that total and writing it in. If I tried using the sum function, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't work. You have to, if you're going to use the footer, you're going and you want to reflect things like sums, counts, whatever, you're going to have to calculate those yourself.
It smells like an R version.
Well, I don't, I'm not sure, but maybe so. Let's go to the, so I have the, the object method referring to the form controller method. Form controller method comes up here. And let's see, we're not adding items right now. We're looking at the list box. So here's what happens when I change a number. I want to recalc this item. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the current item. I put it in an object simply because it makes it easier to read. I could just as easily refer directly to form.lb.currentItem. And I want the total of that item to be the price times the quantity. And you notice I don't even have the price displayed on here. I could. In production, of course, I actually would, but I didn't because I wanted to point out that you don't have to. This again is a huge benefit for displaying complex data structures. The object behind this little 4 or 5 column line could be massive, but in this context, the only thing I want the customer or I want the user to see is just you know, these 5 pieces of information. I don't want them concerned with or confused with all this other stuff. And I don't have to. You know, I can simply show what I want. I still have everything available to do whatever I want. You've probably discovered this. You have to set the subform collection to itself to force it to redraw. 4D acknowledges that this is a bit of a error right now. More specific, and there's a more specific case I can show you as well. But if you don't do that, like let me comment this out.
So that's how you do it.
This is how you do it. See, so now, oh, and you know what? Let's trace this too. Okay, so that time it did it. But so now I'm going to change this, and boom. Now the object, you know, yes, it's got a quantity of 5. Yes, it's got a price, and yes, it's got a big number, but it doesn't show. Darn frustrating, isn't it? Yes, it was. Now I come down here, and there they go. That's the trick right there. If you take nothing away from this presentation beyond that, that will probably save you at least a couple of hours.
So what code did you end up using for the footer?
So for the footer, I do this. The object name is footer 5.
Ah, okay, good.
I get a pointer, and then I just pull the sum right off of it.
Nice.
That's all there is to it.
Yeah.
And while we're here, just looking at the other interesting stuff, this is a menu, a dynamic menu that, as you see, I build as soon as it pops up. So for anybody that thinks that building menus is a big onerous deal that takes too long, and so you have to do it at startup and then never change them, I beg to differ. You can build a menu really quick. You can display it, you can get the result, and then you can clear it. And I have never had a memory leak doing this. I've been doing it for years. And what I'm doing here is just getting the key. So if I have a result, then I come down and figure out what the next line number is going to be. Well, let's just watch one. I get my tempo, which is whatever item it is that I just selected. And then I just make a new item with those values, because the layout of the items object is slightly different from the layout of the line items object. I push it onto the line items array, and then I redraw the database. And it just works.
For those who might not know, that the way that Kirk did the dynamic pop-up menu can also be used for making hierarchical menus. So where each item has its own list that pops up to the side. Also quite clever, nice interface element to add.
Yeah, menus are, you know, building menus is fabulous. It's fast. It is a really intuitive user interface. I honestly cannot remember the last time I went to the work of using a hierarchical list for a user choice situation like that. I'm reticent to say never, but it's just so much easier to do that, and it's especially easier to when you want, as a user interface, like you want to make it so the user can just right-click on a row here and have some options, and in their variable or whatever. It's that's another presentation, but that's certainly a useful feature. Now, here's something that there's been some chatter about on the NUG, and frankly, I even had to just file a case with 4D to get a good answer to. And to demonstrate it, I go back to one of my other, where the hell did my Explorer page go? Oh, there it is. Okay, let's go back here to external dialog. No, I think it's this one. There it is. Okay, so now we're returning to the Nobel laureates. I'm gonna run this, and let's find one where we've got some people. Okay, so here we are, 2016 physics Nobel laureates. I don't like Haldane. I want him out of there. How do you make one of these darn things disappear when they're in a collection? You may have noticed on the NUG, there's been a lot of discussion about that. And now you're saying, ha, see, you couldn't do it either. Well, actually, I did do it. This is a bug Vance just confirmed to me yesterday, as a matter of fact, that when I did that delete, and even though I reset that collection, it should go away. But let's look at another one. Let's dis Stoddard. Now, how did I make that work? Let's walk through it, because this is important. This is one of those things that will be incredibly frustrating if you can't make it work, because, let's face it, you got to be able to delete lines out of a list box. I mean, how can you not do that? So here's the process. I make a new collection, and I get the current item. Okay, we know about that. I go through, and you might be thinking, well, why didn't I just use the current item index? Well, the reason is because maybe I've got, so I've got this collection of, in this case, laureates that I want to delete in laureate select. And I put that into this collection name select column just for readability. Now, if there's at least one of them, I want to get an array of the index of each selected item. And to do that, this is the magic sauce. This is what, and this one I can't take credit for. This is something that somebody at 4D gave me, and I am incredibly grateful. What we do here is I pass it a collection, and I pass it a selected collection. Okay, so what I've got here. And then I pass it a pointer to a long int array. And what I'm asking for is that I want this long int array populated with the index numbers of the selected items within the main collection. Okay, so I've got my original collection, I've got my selection, and in this case, I did cheat a little bit because I'm just iterating through these selected columns. I get the index. I say the index is equal to the original. I look in the original collection for the index of the selected collection $i minus $1, because I'm iterating using classic 4D, and so I have to convert that down to a collection-based index, which begins at 0. So if I find that, then I append that to my long int array, and then I return my long int array. So back here on the form, what that gives me is this long int array named index. Contains the index numbers of the selected collection items. So now I can loop through that index, and I start at the bottom on this. I do this out of habit. I don't think it's technically required. I have just always done it because it's just too, this is one of those leaps of faith that's too hard for me to make. So I start at the bottom. I come up through the selected items. I remove them. And then I update the source. And just because I couldn't make it work, I was trying updating everything. And then I pinged Vance again, and he confirmed that, no, that's actually a bug.
I did it a little bit differently, and I'm not sure if it's exactly equivalent to what you're saying. But in the case that I was deleting some records from the database, so I I did a drop on the user selection, right? And then I found that it didn't update the list box. And then after that, I did a minus on the selection, on the displayed selection. You do, and I'm also using forms, so it's like form selection minus user selection. I just put it in the chat window, and that seemed to update the interface afterwards.
You know, I think when they, I agree that this solution still seems a little clunky. I think you're on to the correct thing. I think I tried some stuff like that also, and I probably got frustrated when I couldn't see the results happen.
Sure.
So no, I think once that little UI issue is cleared up, that's going to go a long way toward making this stuff more intuitive as well.
Yeah,
and probably
definitely a workaround. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I'm not sure where we are in the presentation, but we might want to. We're going on almost 2 hours.
Oh, geez, that's no good.
But I'll let you continue, but might want to consider.
Okay, well, fortunately, we are at the end. That was the last big thing I had. Although I will, I got to call out, and I won't spend time showing it now, but I'll just say, if you guys haven't checked out the new path to object method, do so. This is fabulous. This simplifies so many things about dealing with paths and file names, and just my goodness, it is just so good. I can't recommend it enough. And so with that, I will say thank you, and
thanks, Kirk.
Some resources that I found really interesting and helpful doing this presentation are these, and with that, I will turn it back over to Brent.
Awesome. Yeah, if you'd like to share your slides, I can provide a link to them on the post for the meeting.
Okay, I will.
Mostly it was just cues, but there's definitely some links in there. Yeah. So anyways, coming back for anyone that jumped in the middle, that was Kirk Brooks with a wealth of information about basically an exploration of the new ways of doing things in V17 with Orda and forms. It's just an amazing amount of functionality you can implement with very little code, and it was quite interesting. So we did have a few people mention, say thank you, and they look forward to reviewing it in the YouTube video. Patrick Emmanuel also just said thanks. We'll look again in the video to review. He's in the YouTube chat window. I won't blather on too much, but I will.
Hello?
This demo. There you go. Hello. Yeah.
Brent, you faded out.
Oh, sorry. You know,
Oh,
seems to happen with Google here and there. Unfortunately, you know, if I could host all these services, I'd fix everything. You know. But thanks again, Kirk. Everybody,
Thank you.
might go check out Subcontractor Manager, Sub Manager, and see what Kirk's been up to. You can see information about our next meeting at 4dmethod.com/schedule. We, in fact, do not have anybody scheduled for November 7th, so that could be you, perhaps. I'll be listing the dates as well for 2019. So if you've been waiting on the sidelines for an opportunity, well, one just happened. You could come in and save the day. So reach out, and if you have some presentation ideas, and let us know at 4dmethod or at gmail.com. Again, if anybody else has any last words, now is a good time to say it. But otherwise, you can support 4DMethod at Patreon, patreon.com/4DMethod. Check it out. There's a few interesting benefits of support other than the fact that these meetings would actually continue. So, yeah. Thanks everybody for the extended meeting. Sorry about the technical problems at the beginning. Thank you, Donna and Jim.
Thank you. Thank you, Brent. Thank you, Kirk.
Okay.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
And Ricardo. Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Have a good day.
Thanks. All right. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.